Okay, so you're really looking to dig into Adorno, huh? Always a fascinating choice for a deep dive, and definitely challenging. Looks like we can skip the philosophy intro, though.
Yeah.
You got excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on Adorno,
Yeah, that's right.
a solid starting point.
Yeah.
Really solid. We'll hit the big stuff. His early work, Dialectic of Enlightenment, Critical Theory, Negative Dialectics,
Mhm.
all that good stuff.
Looking forward to it.
What's so interesting to me here is how Adorno takes like familiar philosophical concepts,
Hmm.
the classics, and then he kind of twists them in these really unexpected ways.
Mm.
Where would you say that's most apparent in what we've got here?
His early work is a great place to start. I mean, even before his exile, you see Adorno grappling with figures like Kierkegaard
Hmm.
and developing this really unique approach to language and philosophy itself, almost like he's laying the groundwork for his later critiques of society and culture.
So it's not just like influences here, but like he's actively wrestling with these thinkers
Mm.
and like turning them inside out to create his own path.
Exactly. Exactly. Take his 1931 lecture, The Actuality of Philosophy. It's often seen as his philosophical manifesto,
Yeah.
a declaration of what philosophy should be in these turbulent times.
A manifesto, huh? Bold move.
Hmm.
I mean, most philosophers are content with, pondering life in their ivory towers
Yeah.
quietly. What makes Adorno so different, so bold?
Well, he saw philosophy as a form of riddle solving. Which might sound simple, but it's really different from that traditional view of philosophy as a quest for absolute truth. Adorno was convinced that truth was fragmented, obscured by the social conditions of elite capitalism.
So instead of finding some like grand unifying theory of everything, it's more about piecing together fragments of truth hidden within the complexities of the world around us. Is that it?
Yeah, exactly. Like he uses the example of Marx's analysis of the commodity form. Remember how Marx unpacked this seemingly simple object to reveal the hidden social relations and power dynamics of
Oh,
capitalism?
no, yeah.
For Adorno, that's what philosophy should be doing, excavating the truth embedded within everyday phenomena.
Hmm. Okay, that's making more sense. But how does this riddle-solving approach actually work in Adorno's own writing? It still seems a bit abstract.
Well, his work on Kierkegaard is a great example. Instead of just analyzing Kierkegaard's ideas, Adorno takes his metaphors and imagery literally, turning them into what he calls objective images to reveal the social content lurking beneath the surface.
So he's taking Kierkegaard's focus on individual subjectivity
Hmm.
and using it to illuminate the objective social forces that shape our lives. Kind of a neat trick.
Yeah, it is. One example is his analysis of the window mirror in Kierkegaard's writings.
Hmm.
For Kierkegaard, it represents inward reflection, but Adorno points out that in a bourgeois apartment, a window mirror also reflects the capitalist city outside. Even in his attempt to retreat inward, Kierkegaard can't escape the social reality that surrounds him.
That's a really insightful reading. It really highlights how even our most private thoughts and experiences are always already shaped by the social world.
Exactly. And this theme of the interconnectedness between the individual and society runs throughout Adorno's work. And it's key to understanding his later critiques of mass culture and the culture industry.
Now let's turn to Adorno's views on language. You mentioned earlier that he had a unique approach.
All right.
What makes it stand out, particularly for a philosopher?
Adorno was deeply critical of both the positivist view, which sees language as merely a tool for representing reality, and the Heideggerian view, which he found too abstract and disconnected from concrete social reality. Instead, he proposed what he called configurative language.
Configurative language. Okay, that sounds intriguing. What does he mean by that?
Well, Adorno recognized this inherent connection between the form and content of language. For him, language wasn't just about representing things accurately, but about how language itself, through its historical development, carries traces of truth and social reality.
So he's saying that the words we use are not neutral tools,
Yeah.
but are loaded with historical and social meaning.
Precisely. And the philosopher's task, according to Adorno, is to excavate these layers of meaning, to find the words that unlock the truth of a particular historical moment. He saw language as both a reflection of and a tool for understanding the social world.
That's a fascinating perspective on language. It almost makes philosophy sound like archaeology or detective work.
I think that's a great analogy. Adorno believed that true philosophical insight comes from carefully attending to the nuances of language and how it shapes our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
This focus on language seems to tie in nicely with his idea of philosophy as riddle solving. It's about finding the right words, the right concepts to unlock the hidden truths embedded within our social reality.
Exactly. And this approach is really apparent in one of his most famous works, Dialectic of Enlightenment, which he co-authored with Max Horkheimer.
Ah, yes. Dialectic of Enlightenment. That's where things start to get really complex.
Oh.
And perhaps a bit bleak. It's a challenging read, even for a seasoned philosopher. But I'm sure our listener is eager to delve into it. What would you say are the key takeaways for someone approaching this book for the first time, particularly from a philosophical perspective?
Dialectic of Enlightenment, it's a dense and provocative work, for sure. But at its heart, it's a critique of reason itself. Adorno and Horkheimer argue that the Enlightenment project, the one that aimed to liberate humanity through reason, paradoxically, it's led to new forms of domination and barbarity.
That's a pretty huge claim. It seems counterintuitive to say that reason, which we often associate with progress and liberation, can actually lead to oppression. How do they even make that argument?
Well, they trace this dynamic all the way back to the origins of Western thought,
Wow.
examining how reason, in its attempt to master nature and achieve self-preservation, becomes instrumentalized, turning into a tool for domination and control.
So it's not reason itself that's the problem, but how it's been used, how it's become distorted and turned against its original aims of liberation.
Precisely. And they offer this fascinating analysis of the Odyssey as an early example of this.
Okay.
They see Odysseus' journey as an allegory for the development of Western rationality. His cunning, strategic thinking, his relentless pursuit of self-preservation. All of these represent the triumph of instrumental reason, but at a cost.
That's interesting. I never would have thought to connect the Odyssey to a critique of the Enlightenment. But I can see how Odysseus' constant maneuvering and manipulation could be seen as a metaphor for the way reason can be used to control and dominate both the external world and our own inner nature.
Exactly. Take the famous episode with the sirens, for example.
Right.
Odysseus wants to hear their song, but he knows it's deadly, so he plugs his crew's ears with wax and has them tie him to the mast.
So he's using reason to suppress both his own desires and the potential allure of the siren song. It's like he's sacrificing a full embodied experience for the sake of self-preservation.
And that, for Adorno and Horkheimer, is the problem with instrumental reason. It leads to a kind of alienation from both the natural world and our own sensual, emotional selves. We become detached, calculating subjects, focused only on means and ends.
This reminds me of Adorno's famous line, "The wholly enlightened earth is radiant with triumphant calamity." It's a chilling image, but it really captures that sense of despair that kind of pervades Dialectic of Enlightenment. Do they offer any hope, though? Is there any way out of this dilemma?
Adorno and Horkheimer do hint at a possibility of a positive concept of enlightenment, a form of reason that is self-reflective and recognizes its own limitations. They suggest that by understanding the ways in which reason has become distorted and instrumentalized, we might be able to reclaim its liberatory potential.
So it's not about rejecting reason altogether, but about developing a more nuanced and critical understanding of its possibilities and its dangers.
Exactly. They're calling for a kind of reason that doesn't seek to dominate and control, but to understand and reconcile. It's a difficult and precarious project, but it's crucial for avoiding the triumphant calamity of a world ruled by unchecked instrumental reason.
Now, Ordo's social theory builds on this critique of reason and offers a pretty sharp analysis of how these dynamics play out in the realm of culture and everyday life.
Right. He was particularly interested in the phenomenon of late capitalism, a term he used to describe the increasingly integrated and totalized form that capitalism had taken in the 20th century.
Late capitalism. It's a term we hear a lot these days, but Adorno was writing about this decades ago. What did he see as the defining features of this new phase of capitalism? And how did his analysis differ from Marx's?
Well, Adorno argued that in late capitalism, the logic of commodity exchange, what he called the principle of exchange, had come to permeate every aspect of life, not just the economic sphere. This meant that social relations were increasingly mediated by the exchange of goods and services, leading to a form of alienation that went even deeper than what Marx had described.
So it's not just about the exploitation of workers in factories, but about a more pervasive form of alienation that affects our relationships, our culture, even our own sense of self.
Precisely. And this is where his critique of the culture industry comes in.
Oh, yeah.
He saw mass media advertising and popular entertainment as key mechanisms through which this logic of commodification and alienation was reproduced.
The culture industry. It's one of the Frankfurt School's most enduring and controversial concepts. Can you unpack it a bit for our listener? I'm sure they're familiar with the basic idea, but might be interested in Adorno's specific take on it.
Of course. Adorno argued that the culture industry produces standardized, commodified cultural products, you know, designed to entertain and distract us, to pacify us, and to ultimately prevent us from developing critical consciousness. He saw it as a system of mass deception, where we're constantly being sold products and ideologies that reinforce the existing social order.
It's a pretty bleak picture. He's suggesting that even our leisure time, our moments of escape and entertainment are actually being used to manipulate and control us.
Right. He saw the culture industry as a key mechanism through which late capitalism maintains its grip on our minds and our imaginations.
So instead of offering genuine artistic expression or critical reflection, the culture industry just feeds us a steady diet of mindless entertainment and consumerist propaganda.
That's one way to put it. And this, of course, connects to his broader critique of consumerism. The idea that under late capitalism, our identities are increasingly defined by what we buy and consume. We become, in his words, appendages of the machinery of consumer culture.
This is all starting to sound incredibly depressing. Is there any way to resist this all-encompassing system of control? Does Adorno offer any glimmers of hope?
Well, Adorno was a deeply critical thinker, but he wasn't entirely without hope. He believed that true art, particularly avant-garde art, could offer moments of critical insight and disruption. He saw art as a potential site of resistance, a space where the contradictions and antagonisms of society could be expressed and explored.
So he's not saying that all art is bad, or that we should just reject all forms of popular culture.
Not at all. He was a sophisticated and nuanced thinker. He recognized that even within the culture industry, there could be moments of genuine artistic expression and critical reflection, but he urged us to be vigilant, to develop a critical eye that could discern between the genuine and the manipulative, the authentic and the commodified.
That's a valuable skill in today's world, where we're constantly bombarded with information and entertainment.
Absolutely, and it's a skill that Adorno's own work can help us develop. He offers a powerful set of tools for analyzing and critiquing the world around us, for seeing through the illusions and deceptions of late capitalism.
Now, Adorno is known for his notoriously difficult concept of negative dialectics. It can be a real head-scratcher, even for experienced philosophers. What are the key takeaways for our listener, someone who's already familiar with the terrain of philosophy, but might need a bit of guidance navigating this particular Adornian landscape?
Well, negative dialectics, it's one of those concepts that can make even the most seasoned philosopher a little uneasy.
Yeah, I think our listener would agree. So how do we unpack this in a way that's both insightful and accessible, given their background, of course?
Adorno really saw traditional philosophy with its focus on identity and unity as failing to truly grasp the complexities and contradictions of reality, especially in the face of events like the Holocaust.
Right.
Negative dialectics is his attempt to move beyond those limitations.
So instead of striving for some kind of grand synthesis or reconciliation, negative dialectics embraces contradiction and non-identity as like essential aspects of reality itself.
Exactly. For Adorno, the truth lies not in some final resolution, but in the persistent tension between thought and its object. You know, our concepts are categories. They can never fully capture the fullness of reality.
So it's about acknowledging the limits of our own thinking, recognizing that there's always something that eludes our grasp.
Right. He's urging us to think against the grain, to resist that temptation to impose preconceived categories onto the world, and instead to let the object in all its complexity and non-identity guide our thinking.
This reminds me of his idea of the priority of the object. It's not about bending the world to fit our theories, but letting the world challenge and reshape our thinking.
Yeah, that's a great connection. And this approach has some pretty profound implications for how we understand both ethics and politics. For Adorno, after Auschwitz, there is no right living in the false. Any attempt to formulate ethical principles or political programs without acknowledging the complexities and contradictions of reality is doomed to fail.
That's a powerful statement. It suggests that any meaningful ethics or politics must emerge from a deep engagement with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be.
Exactly. Adorno was deeply critical of traditional moral philosophies, particularly Kant's emphasis on abstract moral duty.
Right.
He felt that these systems failed to account for the concrete historical conditions in which ethical decisions are made.
So instead of trying to derive like universal moral principles, Adorno is suggesting that we need to pay attention to the particularities of each situation, to the specific social and historical forces at play.
Precisely. He believed that true ethical action arises not from abstract principles, but from a kind of moral impulse, a spontaneous response to suffering and injustice.
This moral impulse sounds a bit mysterious. Can you give me a concrete example of what he means?
He points to the example of the individuals who attempted to assassinate Hitler back in 1944.
Oh, wow.
They acted not out of some abstract sense of duty, but out of a visceral rejection of the horrors they witnessed. Their actions were driven by a deep moral intuition, a recognition of the absolute wrongness of the Nazi regime.
So it's about a kind of gut-level sense of right and wrong, a response that comes from a deep engagement with the concrete realities of a situation.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And this focus on the particular, on the concrete, is also central to Adorno's political thought. He was deeply skeptical of grand utopian schemes or revolutionary movements that sought to impose a predetermined vision of the future.
That skepticism makes sense given his experience with the rise of totalitarianism in the 20th century.
Yeah.
He saw firsthand the dangers of trying to force reality into a preconceived ideological mold.
Exactly. Instead of grand revolutions, Adorno advocated for a more gradual process of social change, one based on education, critical reflection,
Yeah.
and the cultivation of individual autonomy.
So it's about empowering individuals to think for themselves, to challenge the status quo, and to work towards a more just and humane society, without resorting to violent upheaval or utopian fantasies.
Right, and this is where his idea of Bildung, of self-formation and education, becomes really crucial.
Sure.
For Adorno, true Bildung is not about simply acquiring knowledge or skills, but about developing critical self-awareness, a capacity for independent thinking that can resist the manipulations of the culture industry
Right.
and the allure of totalitarian ideologies.
This emphasis on individual Bildung seems to connect back to his critique of the culture industry. It's about equipping individuals with the intellectual tools they need to navigate the complexities of modern life and to resist the forces that seek to limit their freedom and autonomy.
Precisely. Adorno believed that a more just and humane society could only emerge from a citizenry that was capable of critical thinking, independent judgment, and a deep commitment to ethical action.
Now we can't talk about Adorno without discussing his aesthetic theory, which is arguably one of his most important contributions to philosophy. What are the key ideas that our listener as a philosopher should be aware of?
Well, for Adorno, aesthetics was inseparable from social theory. He saw art as a reflection of and a response to the social conditions in which it was produced. He famously argued that art is the social antithesis of society.
The social antithesis of society. That sounds paradoxical. How can something be both social and antisocial at the same time?
Well, Adorno believed that true art, particularly modernist art, embodies the contradictions and antagonisms of the society in which it's produced. It reflects these tensions while simultaneously resisting them, offering a glimpse of something other, something beyond the confines of the existing social order.
So it's like art holds up a mirror to society, but it's a distorted mirror, one that reveals the flaws and contradictions of the world, while also hinting at the possibility of something better.
That's a great way to put it. And this is why Adorno placed so much emphasis on the autonomy of art. He believed that true art must be free from any external constraints, from any attempt to instrumentalize it for political or ideological purposes.
But how can art be both autonomous and socially engaged? That seems like a difficult balance to strike.
It is. Adorno recognized the tension between these two poles, and he saw the autonomy of art as a kind of necessary illusion.
Okay.
The artwork must appear as if it exists in its own self-contained world, free from external pressures. But this autonomy is ultimately an illusion, because the artwork is always already shaped by the social forces that surround it.
So it's about maintaining this delicate balance between reflecting the world as it is and imagining something different, something beyond the current limitations.
Exactly. And Adorno believed that the truth content of art lies not in any explicit message or meaning, but in its formal structure, in the way it organizes and arranges its materials.
So it's not about what the art is about, but about how it's made, how it functions as an aesthetic object.
Right. He saw the artwork as a kind of social monad, a microcosm of the larger social world, where the tensions and contradictions of society are played out and explored on an aesthetic level.
This reminds me of his concept of metaphysical experience, which he discusses in Negative Dialectics. Can you elaborate on that a bit for our listener?
Yeah, Adorno believed that certain kinds of aesthetic experiences, particularly those evoked by modernist art, can offer a glimpse of something that transcends the limits of our everyday understanding. He called this metaphysical experience.
Mm.
It's a longing for something beyond the purely material and pragmatic concerns of life, a yearning for a reality that's richer and more fulfilling than the one we experience in our everyday lives.
So it's kind of spiritual longing, but without any specific religious connotation.
Exactly. Adorno was deeply skeptical of organized religion, but he recognized the human need for something that goes beyond the purely material. He saw art as a potential source of these transcendent experiences, offering moments of connection, meaning, and a sense of wholeness that we often lack in our fragmented modern world.
That's a beautiful thought.
Yeah.
It suggests that even in a world that can seem cold, alienating, and often meaningless, there are still glimmers of hope, moments of transcendence, and possibilities for connection and meaning.
That's a great summation of Adorno's perspective. He was a deeply critical thinker, but he wasn't a nihilist. He believed in the power of art, the importance of critical reflection, and the human capacity for resistance and transformation.
Well, this has been an incredibly rich and thought-provoking deep dive into Adorno's work. We've covered a lot of ground, from his early influences to his complex theories of society, culture, and aesthetics. Hopefully our listener now has a better grasp of this challenging but rewarding thinker and how his ideas might be relevant to their own philosophical explorations.
And remember, this is just the beginning. Adorno's work is full of layers and nuances that invite continued exploration and interpretation.
Exactly. The journey doesn't end here. Keep questioning, keep challenging,
Well, sure.
keep the dialogue going.